Hello, this is Matthew Chan
and Wes Weaver,
and we welcome you to our newest episode of the TurnKey Investor Show. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about tenant qualifications. What is it that we do in looking at tenants? I mean, how do we screen them, and how do we know who we want to put in our house? So, guess why? So, why do you think I picked this topic today?
I don't know. I guess I was just thinking of one thing. This has probably nothing on here. We didn't rehearse this, but I remember we were in a seminar once, and this guy was talking about tenants, and he kept referring to them as alien beings from another planet.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I know who you're talking about. That.
I mean, I was just thinking. So anyway, sorry. So yes, today's topic is aliens from another planet.
Yeah.
Who are going to live in your houses?
So if you're a new person, new investor, and you haven't had the experience of dealing with the wide world of tenants, you're going to be in for a treat. And those of you that have dealt with tenants, you're going to kind of appreciate some of the things we're saying here. So anyway, Wes, where do you want to start on this tenant talk about how we qualify tenants and why it's important?
Yeah.
Why is it important?
I mean, well, it's important because they are going to be occupying a house that you more than likely have put a lot of money in, some blood, sweat, tears, love, and everything else. So the person who's going to be living within those confinement of that house is very, very important. It's important to me. I know it's important to you. And,
but anybody that has the money can pay the place, right?
No, that's all right. I mean, tenant qualification is definitely something where you can't judge a book by its cover, and no matter, I don't care how long you've been doing it, it's just a tough to, because our nature is to not judge people, and yet when you're qualifying for tenants, that's really what you kind of have to do. You have to kind of say, is this person worthy of being my tenant, of living in this house? Are they worthy in their housekeeping? I mean, we're going to go down a whole list of qualifications, but it's really tough to kind of, because in the beginning you want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. And tenants in the beginning, they put their best foot forward. They always put their best foot forward.
Right. So they try to say the right thing. They're very respectful, and all this stuff.
And so it's tough to kind of say. It's tough to kind of understand the game that's being played, and at the same time, you be polite, be non-judgmental in a way, but yet make smart business decisions.
Right. Well, before we get into what we talk about, the one thing I do want to get up front before we get into this video is that you have to be careful in how you qualify tenants. Okay, you can't discriminate based on age. I don't know the whole list. You can't by creed, religion, race. There's a whole list of it.
Children.
That's true. Yeah, marital status. Yeah. Right, children. There's a whole laundry list of items that you cannot discriminate on. Okay, so let's just start that off. Okay, but having said that, there are also many things that you can qualify or disqualify on somebody, which we're going to get into. Mm-hmm. So, Wes, what jumps up on the top of your list when you look at a tenant for you? Let's see if it's the same for me.
I wish I had
your top two.
Well, I wish I had a simple question for that, because if we're talking about on the private market, then we look at job. If we're looking at Section 8, which is I hate to keep thinking Section 8, but it's so much of what I do now. I look at their housekeeping. So depending on the tenant, really seriously, depending on the tenant, depends on what is the most important thing I'm going to look for.
Well, Section 8 is a bit of a specific one, why don't we start with, not to say that we won't talk about the section, but let's start off with the private sector.
So job.
They got to have a job.
Job.
Okay.
A history. At least, I don't know, a year would be good.
Yeah, it would be good.
That would be good.
All right, and what's number 2 for you?
Rental history. Landlord.
Yeah, I think that's the same too.
You got to be able to call the landlord and find out they're not being evicted. How long have they been there? How much is their rent? All that type of stuff.
Yeah. But the thing, but I know there's a lot of people who would disagree with us. There's a lot of people in the traditional property management circles, they would say pulling the credit score. What do you think about that?
Credit score for us, credit score, I guess, can give you a window into how are these people, how do they take care of their bills, maybe even, how credible are they, do they, keep up with their moral obligations and things like that. But, I guess for us, Matt and I guess have kind of made the conclusion that a lot of people are going to have bad credit scores for various different reasons. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that they can't be a good tenant. That may mean that they can never buy a house. It may mean they can never buy a car. But, everybody lives somewhere. And I guess credit score for us just has never really been, I guess, a hot topic.
Well, I think the reason being is because of the type of houses that we've been dealing with in the market.
That's true.
I would argue that if you're, you knew I rented for a long, long time. Yeah. And I'm pretty certain that the neighborhood I was living in,
mm-hmm.
The apartments that where I lived in,
mm-hmm.
I do think a majority of them had at least, I wouldn't say they may not be stellar credit scores, but they have better credit scores than the average bear.
That's true. I mean, if you're in the market where you're renting, to hire in houses, hiring in, clients or tenants, then credit score, may be, a good thing to look at. But for us, I mean, if we, for our houses that are renting for anywhere between $500 and $700 a month. And in our area, that's not dumpy houses. Those are, nice 3-bedroom, 2 baths with central heat and air, brick, and everything else. But, if we weed out people with bad credit scores, I mean,
we would have nobody.
Sometimes, we're looking at applicants. Yeah. I mean, we're trying to find reasons to rent to them, not reasons necessarily why not to rent to them.
Right. Now, again, one of the things I want to say is because our listeners are all over the country and they have different resources available to them. I mean, like when I was in Atlanta, they had tenant services. In other words, they would check to see if they've ever been evicted before, mm-hmm. and of course they would get a credit score. And I thought that was kind of a nice little service, mm-hmm. whether or not they've ever been evicted. Now, as you know, we kind of cobbled together our own little service mm-hmm. with somebody we knew, that would check the evictions and stuff. How do you feel about somebody that's been evicted before?
That is a big one. I mean, because if they've been evicted before, mm-hmm. typically when a landlord goes to evict someone, it wasn't off the cuff. I mean, it was usually
the last resort.
It's usually the last resort. That means mm-hmm. that the landlord tried to work it out, or tried to say, this is what you owe, when are you going to pay, when are you going to pay, when are you going to pay, and then it was the end of the month, and they said, you know what, I've done all the talking I can do. And so eviction records, I probably, I would stay away from people who probably have an eviction record.
Yeah. And this sort of goes beyond the practicality. I mean, I tend to operate what goes around comes around, and I don't mm-hmm. like, even though I wasn't the person being taken advantage of or being run out on, I kind of feel like what goes around comes around. I am certainly not going to reward somebody that's running out on this other landlord, even though we get the short-term benefit. Because my thinking is, when it comes time for him to leave, guess who he's going to stick it to?
They're going to stiff us, Yeah,
they're going to stiff us, and they're not going to feel anything about it.
No. Mm-mm.
So my thing is, I just don't want to be party to it.
Right. Yeah, we usually, that's why we always get a landlord reference, and and I always tell the landlord, how much do they owe you? When are they supposed to pay it? And I usually try to, deal with them, I guess, after that day. Or I'll just tell the tenant, hey, look, I spoke to your landlord. You're going to owe X amount when you go to move. So, make sure you get that squared away with him. And I'm going to check back with him on the day I told him I would call him back.
Yes. Yeah. And now, now I know you and I have seen a ton of applications over the years. Mm-hmm. I mean, probably literally hundreds. Mm-hmm. And what about those tenants that it says, they live with family? They have no, here they are, they're like 30 or 40 years old, and they have minimal history.
If they're 18 or 21, then okay, everybody has to start somewhere, and we'll deal with them, as we can. But yes, if they're 30 or 40 years old, then it typically just means, in my opinion, I have to assume that they're just hiding something, or where have you been living? Usually you haven't been living with mom and dad. So you either have roommates, or you've been married and you were divorced. Now you're back at home. What's the story? But you've got to get into what the story is. If they're, and pay attention to your own intuition. That's a great thing. About, finding tenants and using your judgment is trust your own intuition a lot. And I think you'll be right more often than you're wrong.
I haven't actually talked about this in a long, long time. I did this in an audio recording of one of the TurnKey Investor programs. I don't even remember what the title is. It's probably the property management one. But one of the things that, and I think I remember telling you early on, is that it was important to get the story. Mm-hmm. And when I say get the story, I mean, that means digging in. And I'm talking about going beyond the staple questions. It really, and it's very hard to teach.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I actually tried to teach that, and, you know, you give them a list, and so they would just read the questions.
Yeah. I mean, it's part, you've heard saying it's part art and it's part science. That's
absolutely.
That's great. I mean, that's what, you know, looking through an application and your questionnaires, I mean, that's what it's about.
That's a starting point. It's only a starting point. It
Right.
gives you a place to start the conversation.
Right.
You know, I like to know where they live. I mean, where have they lived, what their lifestyle, what their hobbies are. You know, whether they're divorced, they have a girlfriend, boyfriend. I mean, you start making talk, you know, what their kids like, have they been, you know, and I think if you have a conversation, you can find out a lot of things that doesn't show up.
Right.
And some of it not so good.
Yeah. I mean, and calling the references and, you know, ask the references questions. So.
Right. Now, there is one particular story that has stuck with me over the years, and I think you know this one here.
The escort service?
Well, no, not that song.
Okay.
They actually were pretty good, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were actually pretty good payers, except for through the years, the escort service people.
Who's a better story than the escort?
Well, you know, it was this young guy. I mean, it was this young guy. He was like 21 years old. He'd already got this girl pregnant. All right. And do you remember it was a preacher or a priest or somebody?
Oh, yeah.
And he was going to bat how he has reformed. He's no longer doing drugs. I mean, this guy was arguing his case. You remember that?
Right.
And I was really on the fence, because you know, I mean, as you know me, I tend to think that it's very hard to change your stripes. You know, if you've been a drug addict, I'm not saying it can't be done, and you want to think better of something, you really do. But I was really skeptical because number one, he was a young guy. He'd already gotten his girl pregnant multiple times. Okay, he had been on drugs and all this stuff, and I'm real skeptical. And of course, this guy, you know, he's from the religion. He says, "Well, I've already put out my own money, and I've helped him turn around, and all this stuff."
Right.
What did you think? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I remember that situation, and I think probably
I don't know what was on your mind, but I was skeptical.
You know,
I mean, I didn't know what to do.
The thing that we learned on that one is if you have some, let's say you only have one application, that's the only one you're working with, and it's skeptical or it's just a little sketchy here and there. And I think the one thing I remember about this story, if it's the same one, was, you know, we asked the guy, would he sign on the lease with him? And they were "Oh no, you know."
Was it? I don't know if I asked. To be honest with you, I think. Oh, I can't remember if I actually brought it up.
Well, I know a few times
I didn't push the issue.
And, you know, a few times we have asked people to sign with them, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, well, no, I'll give them money or I'll do this," but they don't want to sign. So if you have anybody that's questionable, you know, whether they're young, talk to mom and dad. Say, "Hey, look, will your mom sign with you? Will your dad sign with you?" You know, and so forth. And if some of their own friends and family won't sign with them, that's because they think they're going to bail out, and then of course we can go after them for the money. So that'll kind of tell you something.
Well, in this particular situation, the mom apparently had a bad relationship and all that stuff. Mom signed from long distance. It didn't matter because the mom was nowhere to be found. But you know, if I had to do it all over again, that guy who was cheerleading and so on, he was the guy that had to co-sign.
Right.
If I had to turn back the clock.
Right.
I mean, you know, don't come to me and, you know, preaching the praises and all this stuff. You know,
if you're not going to sign.
Right. And but anyway, but I just thought that was that kind of stuck with me over the years. You know, whether or not someone's going to co-sign or not.
Well, maybe in a future episode we'll talk about the escort service. Maybe. Probably not. Don't wait on it.
Well, that's one of the interesting stuff. And okay, so what else about tenants? That one of the things you talked about was housekeeping or how they live.
Yeah, that's very important because, you know, at some point everyone's going to move. They're either going to move paid up or not paid up, but they're going to move. And when they move, you're going to find out how they live. And you know, one thing, this is not rocket science, you know, of course, but you look at yourself from when you moved from your previous house to this house, the house you're living in now, most likely it looks just like it did the house that you moved from. You know, I know mine does. I mean, you know, we're all creatures of habits. We all typically live the same way. And so one thing that I wish I did it more, I wish I could say that I do it on every tenant, but I don't. Yeah. And this is where kind of with Section 8, this is where it gets more important because obviously with Section 8, my rent comes on time from the government every month. So the only responsibility that I look for them at is how are they going to keep the house? I'm going to get the rent, but how is my house going to be, you know, treated? So I'll usually try to find an excuse to go to their house. say, hey, look, I'm going to bring the lease by, either have you sign it, or I need to come, pick up your voucher to get it signed, and find some reason to kind of go to the house that they live in, because that's really all I care about with them. Yeah. And I'll look around because whatever their house looks like, that's exactly what my house is going to look like.
Wes knows that I have mixed feelings about Section 8, and he is right. I do like. There are many aspects I like. Like when he, in a previous episode, he talked about how he was able to minimize the turnover. So I thought that's pretty hot without hardly any marketing costs. But my thing, in terms of tenant qualifications, is that you pay for it at the back end. It's like, and it's like when they move out, every wall is coded. And I hate to say that.
Are you referring with Section 8 or all 10?
Well, Section 8 in particular. It's coded, and we're not here to argue, but
but it is plain. I am going to argue. I mean, I have found, at least with my history, is that the private market, you have just as good a chance with the private market of the walls being smudged and the carpet being, as Section 8. I mean, it's kind of it's a 50-50. I mean, in my opinion, it really.
I think it depends on the house, and I also think the house in the neighborhood has a driving force.
It does.
I mean, and I just think that the houses and the markets. I mean, that's the reason why I kind of got into Section 8, because I just felt that there were. That house in that neighborhood, our best bet was Section 8.
Right.
I mean, it was just a business choice. Don't you think it's like there's guaranteed work you have to do for Section 8 versus like on the private sector, it's a little more forgiving?
It is a little bit forgiving, but what I have found with the amount of money that I'm spending in getting a house on Section 8 is really about the same amount that I'm going to spend to make the house presentable on the private market. And then when Section 8 comes and inspects it, I typically don't spend any more than $200 to $300 making their repairs. It's not like they say, well, you need a new roof, or it's very minimal with the things that I do. So for me, having this, at least here lately, 0 vacancies, guaranteed rent, I'll be more than happy to spend $200 or $300 in repairs for that.
Well, paint jobs aren't $200 or $300.
No, not paint jobs. But what I do now is
the carpets and all.
I paint every house the exact same color. I get the same 5-gallon from Lowe's. So when I come in, and usually it's not a whole house that has to be painted, but if you don't have the color, then you have to paint the whole house. But every house of mine for the past several years everything's the same color. So I can come in, I can go to Lowe's, buy the 5-gallon of paint, I can touch up wherever it needs to be touched up, and it's done.
Well, I think you brought up a very important point, Wes, is that, you see, in the beginning it started out being a niche thing, but now you have some economies of scale.
Yes.
Because you kind of committed to it,
right.
And you've sort of systemized it now. It's not like you're going to customize every house. They're all going to be the same.
Right.
So you get some economies of scale, you get some volume, and I think there is a case to be made in that particular context. So it really depends where people are at.
It depends on where you're at. It depends on your personality, your market. Whether you need to stick with the private market or Section 8.
But getting back to the tenant qualifications.
Yeah.
Okay, so since we have some time, the thing that you look for with a Section 8 is how they live. Now, you said that you don't always go check every house. So how do you verify? I mean, you have a conversation with them?
Well, it's kind of the same way you verify on the private market. You still go through the application. They still have to submit an application. I still call references and things like that. Find out if they have pets. And actually, with Section 8, I don't allow any pets versus the private market. We do allow pets with a pet fee. So even if I don't go to the house, I still put them through. Other than the job qualification, everything kind of remains the same.
Yeah. Well, since you brought up the whole pets thing, I've got mixed feelings on the pets. I mean, the pets thing, I would like to say no pets. And I have found a lot of people do that. A lot of landlords, they say no pets. Right, and I'm not saying that I would never do it. Okay, I always reserve the right to change my mind. Right. I mean, I know I've published and written on the subject, but you know what? It's whatever I write or whatever I said. It's a snapshot of what was going on in my mind. And the pets thing is still something that I'm not firm on. On the higher end properties, I would probably say no way.
Right.
On the lower end ones, even that, I'm starting to change my mind. And the reason why I caved in at that time is because I felt like the people who are going to sneak it in, they're going to sneak it in anyway, and I might as well have gotten the money. That was the rationale at the time. I'm not saying it's the correct one, what I'm doing today, but that was the rationale at that time.
Right.
But I don't know. What do you think, Wes?
It makes
about
sense.
the whole pet situation.
I mean, I hate pets. I mean, that's pretty plain. If you're a landlord, it's plain and simple. You really don't want pets. The question is, if you say no pets, are you going to lose a large part of your market share? So if you think that you're not going to lose, if you think you can still rent the house, even if it costs you an extra month, I would just probably say no pets. And I'll say no pets on my Section 8, and I guess we take it on a case-by-case basis on the private market. But, yes, if people are going to have pets, they're going to sneak them in and they're going to have them. The best you can do is kind of minimize that. You can put it in the lease. You can put it in your lease to say, you are in jeopardy. You have, what's the term? When you're...
you get a penalty?
Not a penalty, but you can be evicted if you have a pet because you're in breach of the lease. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you can make the pet policy in the lease to where they're in breach of the lease, and if you want to kind of hold their feet to the fire, they can either get rid of, the dog or have to move.
That's the thing that always sort of bothered me, and I don't have a strong opinion. Would you file an eviction if they got a pet? I mean, that's the thing, because...
It gives you the option.
And if you don't, then what? Then what? They said, these landlords, they don't care. I mean, it has no teeth.
I guess it depends on the person. I mean, if the person is kind of, either open and willing, maybe willing to pay a pet fee or willing to pay a monthly fee or something like that, then I might try to work something out with them. But there again, sometimes we say you can be dead right, and there are some cases to where if the person doesn't treat you with respect or treat you the right way, you can say, you know what, I'll pay for this vacancy, I'll pay for this eviction to get you out. Yeah. So I mean, in the end, I will be right. Does that make sense? So either you can be nice and have some sense of reality of paying a fee or something, or if you just want to be completely abstinent, then you know what? I've got the money to pay the vacancy and you can go somewhere else.
Yeah, I will tell you, when I see an application, if I see like 3 pets, that scares the hell out of me.
Yeah.
And let me tell you something. Some people say, well, what if I have a bird and a ferret and all that? I don't want to hear, don't talk to me about rabbits, ferrets, birds, and all that. I mean, the only thing I'm willing to even consider is a dog or a cat. And they better be small ones.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll let you have a fish.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've just come across some really whacked out stuff.
And you'll find out, since we're talking about pets, you'll find out that your insurance, there are certain pets they won't allow, like Rottweilers, pit bulls, and things like that. So you have to be aware of all that. But long story short, just try to stay away from the pets because you will never recoup from your pet fee the amount of damage that the pet does.
You know what? Wes is absolutely right. The math never works.
It never works.
The math never works.
So,
it's really more of a service. And
unless you can get like a $2,000 pet fee, then go for it. But other than that, just leave it alone.
Although I would say there's a small, very small case to be made for cats. And they have to be female cats because it was boy cat spray.
Whatever.
I don't know, my girl cat, I don't know. Female cats, they seem to be pretty good. He doesn't care.
No.
All right, I got a small spot for a little cat. I mean, my cat's pretty well behaved, so.
I have a small spot for him. Down at the Humane Society, I have a little cage about that big. That's what they need to do.
All right. Now you got 2 little dogs. I'm gonna come one of these days. One of them gonna be missing. So. Well, anyway, do we have any last parting words regarding tenant qualifications before we?
Just remember, it's part art and part science.
It is definitely.
Follow your application, and at the end of the day, if everything lines up, follow your intuition. And if your intuition says, "Let me wait another week, maybe get another application," then wait another week and get another application.
Yes. Don't be so hungry. I mean, there's always another. There's always another tenant.
Yes.
And what I would say, to me, that's what's important is get the story. And the reason why I say that is it's inherently very difficult. We've been trained to not ask personal and private and invasive questions. Right. But as a landlord, you must learn to get in the habit of being nosy. You want to be nosy. Doesn't mean you have to be rude about it, But you do want to get into their personal affairs. You want to know their business, and that would be my advice.
Yeah.
Okay.
And good luck.
Well, thank you for spending time with us on this episode, and we hope you enjoyed it. And stay tuned for our next episode, and we're going to have something interesting to talk about. All right. Thank you.